Welcome to this week's My Rambling Sanity. Modern conscription, who's actually shown up for it? Right, let's just get straight into it. What would actually happen if tomorrow morning the government turned around and said, right, that's it everybody, you're fighting for your country? Because let's be honest, apart from a comedy sketch or a dystopian Netflix series, what would that actually look like in modern day broken Britain in 2026? This is My Rambling Sanity, and today we're talking about conscription, modern day style. Now, there's been a lot of noise about this recently. Global tensions are bubbling away, conflicts are kicking off in various corners of the world, and of course, here we are, let's sitting ducks, little old Scotland, sitting there quietly hosting nuclear weapons like any other day of the week. So maybe it's time we talk about the practicalities of it all. Let's rewind for a second. Conscription in the UK was introduced for the First and Second World Wars, but let's talk about the Second. Just before the Second World War really kicked off in 1939, initially it was men aged 18 to 41, and later this was stretched to men up to 51. And by 1941, women were brought in too, mainly for non-combat roles. But here's the thing that people forget. It wasn't just about picking up a rifle. You could be sent into the armed forces, of course, but also civil defence, factories, shipbuilding, coal mining, basically anything that kept the war machine ticking. And exemptions, well, there were plenty then, but I'm sure there will be an even longer list now. If you were in a vital job, i.e. farming, engineering, munitions, you might be spared. Medical issues, possibly exempt. Sole breadwinner, maybe. Religious or moral objections, sometimes accepted, sometimes no. It wasn't exactly consistent, and if you refused outright, you could be fined, imprisoned, or worse, socially shunned, proper public embarrassment, not just a slap in the wrist, your whole community looking down their nose at you as if you'd let the team down. Now compare that to today, because let me ask you something honestly. Do you see an army of ready-to-go warriors walking down your local high street? I don't. Do you see people glued to their phones, social media, arguing between each other, queuing up for coffee, not exactly gearing up for national defence, are they? So if conscription did come back, it wouldn't be some overnight announcement. They would draft in emergency legislation, obviously, but that would take time. New legislation defining who serves and for how long, and who gets out of it and how they get out of it. It would be messy, bureaucratic, slow. So who would get called up first? Realistically, young adults, probably 18 to 30-year-olds. But here's where it gets interesting. We live in a world right now that's very big on equality, and rightly so in many respects, but when it comes to conscription, do the same rules apply? Is it everybody? Is it still mostly men? Is it biological men? Do we base it on physical capability, or do we pretend everybody's identical and hope for the best? What about those that fall into the non-binary category? It is a genuine question, and I don't think anybody's got a clear answer. And modern conscription wouldn't look like anything like it did in the 1940s, because it's not just trenches and rifles anywhere. You would need cybersecurity experts, drone operators, engineers, medical staff, logistics coordinators, communication specialists. Half the battlefield would be sitting behind a screen these days. So suddenly that person that spends 12 hours a day gaming might actually be more useful than we all think. It's a mental world we've created. So let's talk about exemptions, because this is where things get very interesting. Let's talk about medical exemptions, because that list would be massive. We live in a very sick society. A lot of people have identities built around about their diagnosis. We're living in a time where it feels like a lot of people are dealing with something, physical, mental and emotional. And I'm not dismissing that. I'm not trying to lessen what anybody suffers with. But it does raise a very important question. If push came to shove, how many people would actually be considered fit to serve? Then you've got key workers, NHS staff, engineers, people that control and maintain our infrastructure. They're not going anywhere. Students might even be protected. And then the moral objections, which brings us to the big question. After all those exemptions, who's actually left? And here's where I'll probably ruffle a few feathers. Why would people want to fight for this country? Because let's be honest, there's no some sort of romantic idea of king country anymore, is it? People are sceptical, rightly so, distrustful, every reason to be, and questioning everything if they've got half a brain in their head. The idea of blindly signing up without questioning who you're fighting for and why you're fighting, that doesn't sit the same way as it did 8 years ago. People aren't wired like that anymore. They've been let down too many times. COVID should have taught us everything about following instruction without questioning it. And it quite possibly was the catalyst that woke a lot of people up to question authority. But here's the bit that really sticks in my throat, because while all these big conversations are happening about war, defence, protecting the nation, there are communities right now where people don't even feel safe walking down their own streets. It literally made national news this week that young schoolgirls in Scotland are being handed out rape alarms as a precaution. Think about that for a second. Children being told, here you go, this is what you need to stay safe. And I'm sorry, but that should never be normal, because in any functioning society, protection doesn't come in the form of a plastic alarm on a keychain. It comes from people, from communities, from individuals who are willing to step up, pay attention, and not just walk past when something doesn't feel right. And yet we've created this culture where everybody keeps their head down, minds their own business, and hopes it's somebody else's problem. So when are we going to start talking about who's going to defend the country right now in the crisis that it's in? Because where are the protectors? Because if we can't even show up for each other in everyday life, what makes us think that suddenly things will change when that gets really serious? And on top of that, we have built a society that is incredibly comfortable. People have worked hard for their lives, granted, their homes, their routines, their safe little bubbles of security. And when you've spent years building that at excessive cost, the idea of risking it all, stepping into something dangerous, uncertain, chaotic, that's a very hard sell. Very hard. Add to that endless distractions, constant media noise, comfort on demand, a culture that prioritises safety and stability, and you've got a population that isn't exactly jumping at the chance to run towards danger. So if conscription ever did become a serious conversation again, I think the reality would be chaos. Exemption queues longer than supermarket lines at Christmas. People suddenly discovering injuries they never knew that they had. A system struggling to find out who's eligible, who's not, and how to even enforce that. And maybe it would force a bigger conversation. Not just about war, but about responsibility, about public responsibility, about community, and what people are actually willing to do to stand up for the people that live next door, the next generation. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about fear-mongering or fantasy scenarios. It's about asking a simple question. If you were called upon, what would you actually do? And I think for a lot of people, that answer is not as clear as what they would like to think. So that has been my week's Rambling Sanity. Please let me know what you think. Would people step up or step back? Because honestly, I think we all know the answer. We're just not saying it out loud.